In a bustling city somewhere in Africa, there lived a man named George. A well-traveled individual, Mr. George had journeyed across all 7 continents. He prided himself on his worldly experiences and often declared himself the most popular and wisest man of his time, a title he believed he had rightfully earned through his extensive travels. Mr. George was married to 2 women, Mrs. Margaret, his first wife, and Mrs. Queen, his second. Surprisingly, the 2 women shared a rare bond of friendship. They cooked together in the same kitchen, laughed often, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Their harmony was something of a marvel. One afternoon, Mr. George summoned both of his wives to the living room. He sat down, crossed his legs, and looked at them with a hint of suspicion in his eyes. "Queen, Margaret," he began, "why are the 2 of you always cooking together in my house?" Margaret, ever calm and graceful, responded first. "Because we like each other," she said with a smile. Queen nodded in agreement, adding, "Yes, we truly do." Mr. George narrowed his eyes but said nothing more. That day marked a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the household. What George didn't realize, however, was that the greatest threat to his legacy wasn't from outside, it was rooted deep within his own home. Behind the walls of trust he thought he had built, secrets began to fester. The very lawyer who handled his affairs, the one he trusted with his will and estate, was entangled in a forbidden relationship with Mrs. Queen. And so, unknown to Mr. George, plans were already in motion. A betrayal brewed beneath the surface, one that would leave him stripped of everything he believed he controlled. Mr. George began to notice small changes in the way his household ran. Mrs. Queen had become more confident, bolder, even. She started speaking with a tone that felt rehearsed. She no longer looked at him with softness, but with something else, something calculating. The shift was subtle, but George was not a fool. Or so he thought. One evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, bathing the house in an amber glow, Mr. George overheard a hushed phone conversation from the veranda. It was Queen's voice, laced with laughter and flirtation. She spoke in low tones, but George caught enough to make his heart pound. "Yes. I told him exactly what you said. He doesn't suspect anything. He thinks I'm just the obedient second wife." George froze. His breath caught in his throat. That night, sleep escaped him. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. Who was she talking to? And what didn't he suspect? The next day, he summoned his lawyer, Mr. Daniels. A man he had known for years. Lawyer. Professional. Or so George believed. "Daniels," he said, "I want to make some changes to my will. Things don't feel right." But Daniels smiled too quickly, as if expecting this. "Of course, Mr. George. But everything is in place already. Your wives are well cared for. You have nothing to worry about." George nodded slowly, but inside, a storm was brewing. He had built his home, his wealth, and his legacy from the ground up. Now, something, or someone, was threatening to unravel it all. What he didn't know was that Mr. Daniels and Mrs. Queen were far more than allies. Their affair was not only romantic, it was strategic. And somewhere in a locked drawer in Daniels' office was a forged version of George's will, one that gave everything to Queen. Mr. George had no idea. But the clock was ticking. Days turned into weeks, and Mr. George's once peaceful mansion began to feel like a cage. The laughter that once rang through the hallways now sounded like echoes of deceit. The warmth in Queen's smile had grown cold, sharp, like the glint of a knife hidden behind a kiss. One night, unable to bear the unease any longer, Mr. George decided to do what he hadn't done in years, snoop. It was nearly midnight. The house was silent, save for the hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. He crept into Queen's private room. She always kept it locked, but tonight, by some stroke of either fate or folly, she had forgotten. The room smelled of expensive perfume and secrets. On her table lay a leather-bound journal. George hesitated, then opened it. At first, it was innocent, daily entries, recipes, reminders, then came the shift. "Daniel says we must be careful. George is beginning to suspect." But it doesn't matter. The will is ready. Once he's out of the picture, everything will be mine. He won't know what hit him. George's fingers tightened around the pages. His vision blurred with rage. He flipped further. He trusts Daniels too much. Poor old fool. He gave him power of attorney last year. We didn't even have to forge his signature. He handed it all over willingly. A thunderclap of betrayal exploded in his chest. The man he trusted like a brother, and the woman he shared his bed with, conspiring behind his back. The room spun. He sat down, journal still in his hand, trying to steady his breath. His thoughts ran wild. Should he confront them? Should he run? Or should he play along, pretending not to know, and strike when they least expected? Outside the door, a soft creak. George turned. Mrs. Quinn stood in the doorway, wearing her nightgown, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. But her eyes, they weren't surprised. They were calm. Cold. You shouldn't have read that, she said, stepping inside slowly. George stood. His voice was low, dangerous. How long has this been going on? She tilted her head slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching. Long enough. Then she smiled, not the smile of a wife, but of a woman who had already won the war. But you see, George, she whispered, this is no longer your house. You just don't know it yet. George's nostrils flared. The room, once silent, now seemed to vibrate with tension. His fist clenched at his sides, veins visible under his skin. The betrayal, the arrogance in Quinn's voice, it boiled his blood. He took a step forward. You're standing in my house, sleeping in my bed, and plotting my downfall, and you dare smile at me. Quinn didn't flinch. It stopped being your house the moment you stopped paying attention. You were too busy calling yourself the wisest man alive to notice what was happening under your nose. The slap came before he realized it. His hand met her cheek with a sharp, echoing crack. But Quinn didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply turned her head back slowly, eyes burning, not with fear, but fury. You've just made your biggest mistake, she hissed. At that moment, the front door burst open. Heavy footsteps thundered down the hallway. George barely had time to turn when Mr. Daniels appeared, sleeves rolled up, jaw clenched. I was hoping we could handle this like gentlemen, Daniels growled. But you had to dig, didn't you? George stepped back, suddenly realizing the trap he had walked into. You're not just sleeping with her. You're both trying to erase me. Daniels pulled a folder from under his arm and tossed it onto the floor. It slid open, photographs, bank papers, a new will, all signed with George's name. You signed power of attorney last year. Everything's legal. The house, the businesses, your estate, it's already ours. You've been nothing but a guest in your own life for the past 6 months. George stared at the documents, his whole world unraveling in seconds. You think you'll get away with this? Daniels laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. You handed us the knife and then turned your back. All we did was cut. But George wasn't finished. Let me tell you something, he said through gritted teeth. You may have the papers, the signatures, the lies, but you forgot one thing, I still breathe. And while I do, this isn't over. Quinn moved closer, venom in her voice. Then take your last breath in this house, George. Because come morning, you won't have a roof over your head, or a name left to ruin. George's eyes locked with hers. No more doubt. No more love. Just war. After that explosive night, Mr. George vanished. Some said he fled the country. Others whispered he went mad. But the truth was colder than any rumor. Mr. George was found dead 3 weeks later, alone, in a shabby motel room at the edge of the city. The coroner called it a heart attack. But those who knew him best believed his heart had simply broken, shattered by betrayal, the weight of pride, and the agony of watching his empire crumble in front of him. The news spread like wildfire. At the reading of his will, the room was packed. Margaret sat quietly, dressed in black, her face unreadable. Quinn arrived late, dressed not in morning clothes, but in a sleek designer gown, with dark sunglasses hiding her eyes. Mr. Daniels stood at her side, holding the golden folder that held George's final words. Or so everyone thought. Daniels cleared his throat, then began. According to the signed document and legal transfer of power prior to his death, 90% of Mr. George's estate, including the mansion, foreign properties, and company shares, are willed to Mrs. Queen. A gasp rippled through the room. Margaret looked stunned. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. Daniels continued. Mrs. Margaret is to receive a monthly allowance, and no claim to any major assets. Margaret turned slowly toward Queen. This wasn't George's voice. He would never do this. Queen said nothing. She didn't even meet her eyes. But as the days passed, the glint in Queen's eye began to fade. Daniel soon grew distant, no longer picking her calls. The passion between them had withered now that the prize was won. Whispers of fraud circled the air. A quiet investigation began behind the scenes, but with George gone, nothing was solid enough to undo the manipulation. Queen moved into the mansion alone. And though it was filled with marble floors and gold-plated memories, it echoed with silence. Guilt came creeping in like a ghost. At night, she sat in the master bedroom, his room, surrounded by his portraits, his books, his scent still lingering in the fabric of the armchair he once loved. The house was hers now. All of it. But what is a throne when the king you dethroned is buried? What is victory when it tastes like ash? Months passed. Daniels vanished, rumored to have left the country with forged documents and offshore accounts. Queen was left behind with wealth, but no peace. One rainy evening, Margaret visited. She stood at the grand gates, holding an old photo of the three of them, George, Margaret, and Queen, smiling, once a family. Queen met her at the doorway. No words at first. Margaret spoke softly. He loved you, you know. In his own way. He just didn't know how to show it. Queen's lips trembled. I know, she whispered, tears finally breaking through. I killed the only man who ever truly believed in me. They stood in silence as the rain poured down. In that moment, not as rivals, but as two women who had lost more than they gained. Queen turned away from the doorway, walked into the hollow house, and for the first time, felt the full weight of everything she had done. All the gold in the world couldn't buy back a soul. And Mr. George. His legacy was gone. Thanks for watching, kindly like, comment and subscribe for more videos. But his story. It had just begun.